When I was a kid, I never understood why anyone would support the Mutant Registration Act in the X-Men films.
The truth is that mutants are very real, and they are among us. We must know who they are, and above all, we must know what they can do.
I'd watch Senator Kelly stand up there and declare that mutants were dangerous and a watch list needed to be drafted about them, but I never understood why anyone in real life would ever support putting a bunch of people on a list.
Senator Kelly.
And there are even rumors, Miss Gray, of mutants so powerful that they can enter our minds and control our thoughts, taking away our God-given free will.
Then again, I was 9.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
But in the last week, a whole subsection of the critical community online has been arguing that the MCU does not just need a mutant registration list after Brand New Day, but the Sentinels.
I did not know that she was going to be an out-and-out, evil terrorist villain. I thought that maybe she would be misunderstood, completely misunderstood in this movie and framed for something like that. I did not expect her to be straight up evil.
She is a mind-raping rectal tumor. She's rotted gunt cheese. She's a wretchful fucking harridan. She belongs in the depths of the raft. What wonders she's performed in making the mutant cause sympathetic. Maybe Stryker was right.
And I just gotta ask, what the hell are we doing here? Is Jean Grey in the MCU evil? According to several YouTube critics and armchair film enthusiasts on TikTok and social media, yes, and that bodes poorly for the status quo defending X-Men movies moving forward. With the new cast being revealed and a clear direction for the X-Men being established as it being the first film to follow up Secret Wars, we have a sense at some level of what's going on. But that doesn't stop multiple commentary channels, reviewers, and just folks online from telling us what is going to happen next, and most of them have never actually picked up an X-Men comic. Jean Grey is the main antagonist in Spider-Man Brand New Day, marking the third film now where she's been the main villain. She has been the main bad guy more frequently than Magneto at this point. Yes, really, Magneto's only been the main bad guy in 2 films, one of which he gets upstaged by Jean Grey. Jean is framed as abandoned by society due to her terrifying ability to overtake the minds of those around her,
Taking away our God-given free will.
The only person who cares about her is her sister Sarah, who, spoiler alert, is kidnapped by the MCU equivalent of ICE, damage control. Jean's initial goal is to figure out where her sister is and what VMAX means, the one last word telepathically communicated to her by her sister. And that turns out to be a torn vent label in the room damage control threw her in, where they experimented on her psychic abilities until her brain melted in her skull. To even find out what VMAX is, she enacts multiple terrorist attacks on damage control sites. But before committing acts of terrorism, she started small, hacking databases wherever possible to learn where her sister was located. Of course, always searching for that term, VMAX, which means nothing whatsoever. It's the last thoughts of a dying person, but she thought it was significant. But as she finds no answers, she becomes increasingly radicalized and increasingly detached from human experience. Due to her abilities to overtake the consciousness of those around her, she doesn't actually see the people who she's taking over as people. They're more like NPCs that she's body hopping into to control, like this is some video game. She sees people as objects to reach her goal, which is saving her sister, the one person who she does value, save for Peter Parker. Peter, for whatever reason, is the only person she can't overtake. He's also responsible for capturing Jean by developing a chip that suppresses mutations. He first builds this for himself, not really for Jean's sake, to suppress his own changing mutations, but I'm sure this chip will never be used in anything dangerous ever again. And, leading up to Jean getting captured, she does a lot of terrorism. She lets people get hit by cars, she causes immense property damage, bombs go off, buildings collapse, the Hulk loses it. Most insidious of all, Jean first threatens the life of MJ, Peter's love interest, before overtaking her mind and teasing Peter with his memories and hopes that MJ will one day remember him. She does this to scare Peter into staying out of her way, but it doesn't change the fact it's incredibly cruel and borders on sexual assault when she kisses him as MJ. Jean is not innocent in this film. She does a lot of bad stuff. While the movie's writers make the claim she didn't actually kill anyone, it really is hard to buy that when so many people are put in harm's way. We see Jean Grey has unintentional collateral damage in the film. When she takes control of the Hulk, she accidentally screws up whatever Bruce was doing for years to control the Savage Hulk and unleashes the Savage Hulk. Jean Grey's actions have unexpected ramifications we see in the film itself that she doesn't anticipate because despite being so powerful, she is in fact a teenage girl. When she's targeting damage control, you get it. It's hard to really blame her. These guys stole her sister, and she has no answers. It's her callousness towards other people, especially Peter, that makes her the antagonist. Though again, it's also her connection to Peter that allows her to ultimately not redeem herself, but start down the path of redemption. By linking into Peter's brain and seeing his memories, she's able to actually empathize with Peter, with another human being, and feel love that she never felt in her life before. It's only when seeing Peter as a person that she sees these memories for what they are. Real human connection. The movie uses Jean as a parallel to Peter, alongside the Punisher who's also there. Peter, Jean, and Punisher all represent what can happen if you lose touch with your humanity, and it's only because Peter has these memories that tether him to his humanity, to his Aunt May, to his friends who no longer remember him, he is able to pull both Jean and the Punisher out of a dark spiral of vengeance and revenge and hatred, even if just briefly, and even if both of their quests of vengeance are justified to some degree. But a lot of people online are outraged that Jean is as destructive in this film as she is, which, I gotta be honest, seems concerning, maybe even laughable. Now, the MCU is drama. It's melodrama. It's an elevated reality. The things that happen don't really happen in real life, and it sometimes tangentially connects to our own reality, which is all well and good. But the MCU has consistently argued that the heroes are capable of massive amounts of collateral damage. That's often overlooked by the general public. The Avengers are responsible for tons of deaths, hundreds even, across the multiple Avengers films from phases 1 through 3. Yet none of them get the same ire that Jean Grey does. Hell, even villains who are redeemed do worse things than Jean Grey does. People got mad that Jean Grey made the Hulk go crazy. Well, Wanda Maximoff does that on purpose. Only difference there is that while Jean Grey keeps the Hulk contained in Damage Control HQ, Wanda sends the Hulk into a city full of civilians that causes billions of dollars of damage and causes a massive amount of casualties. But she's welcomed back right afterwards. That's way worse than anything she does in WandaVision. Jean Grey is criticized for attacking a gang of guys with guns who snatch her sister off in the streets. Well, Tony Stark in his first movie attacked a similar gang, snatching kids off the street. I wonder why people aren't mad at Tony Stark for attacking this gang, but are mad at Jean for attacking this gang. I can't see any main difference here. Tony Stark is a weapons merchant who had a hand in possibly thousands, if not millions of deaths over the course of decades. Oh, but then there's the Void, or the Hulk, or hell, just whatever the Punisher does in every episode of Daredevil he shows up in. But of course, all of that is just child's play compared to Doctor Strange, a guy accountable for multiple universal incursions. By comparison, even counting the people Jean Grey hurt in her terrorist attacks, she doesn't even equate the harm done by Wanda in just the opening scene of Captain America Civil War. We have no confirmed deaths from Jean Grey, and if her screenwriters ended to go by, everyone just ended up seriously injured as opposed to dead. Like, yeah, Jean blows up the front of a building, but that building's been evacuated by that point, so it's empty. Not this one, though. This building is full of people. There's the guy gets hit by a car, maybe, but there's a guy who shows up that looks like him in the credits, and it's not It's debatable if that's the same guy. Who cares, ultimately? 1 body count compared to 26 with Wanda. Seems like small potatoes. Again, it's all really strange, isn't it? This is one of the least destructive depictions, by the way, of Jean Grey as an antagonist. In X3, she kills a lot more characters on screen. There's Cyclops, Professor Xavier, half the Morlocks, if not all the Morlocks. And again, that's nothing compared to what we see in the comics, where the Dark Phoenix eats a star, triggering a supernova that kills over 5 billion people in an instant. And by the way, in that storyline, the X-Men defend Jean even after all of that. They're on her side. And by the way, this isn't even counting Madeline Pryor, Jean Grey's clone who becomes the Goblin Queen and opens up a vortex to hell after Cyclops ditches her for the original Jean Grey. It's a whole thing, and Cyclops deserves his ass to get beaten for that whole thing. So what arguments do these culture warriors have against Jean that makes her so evil here? It's that Jean is just Marvel pushing a terrorist agenda into mainstream life, making you sympathize with a terrorist, which has never happened before in the MCU.
After all of these years of being like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine, like, oh, it would be so cool to have like the X-Men cross over with the Avengers. Like, what if everything was in the same canon? Well, we're finding out now what that's going to look like, and it is, well, terrorism. It seems like the Sentinels have a point. Henry Gyrick might have a point, because oh my gosh, our introduction to Jean Grey.
Her worst action is when her powers are completely unlocked in a fit of emotional rage, threatening an entire kilometer of New York City. That kilometer consists mostly of water and damage control agents, but it is still full of innocent civilians. They do get frozen by her powers, but none of them die. She might threaten their lives, but none of them die. It also lasts for a couple minutes, a far cry from what Wanda does in WandaVision to Westview. It's important to note, by the way, also, that this Jean Grey is a version of the character who is yet to be part of the Xavier Institute. She's not an X-Man yet. She has no one on her side. She's completely alone, and she has become disassociated from others. Thankfully, Spider-Man finds a way to non-lethally calm Jean Grey down by showing her a core memory of his Aunt May, showing Peter love and attention, and that unconditional love anchors Jean. It allows her to walk back what could have been something potentially bad. This is good that a non-lethal option is found and Jean is able to develop more. I think Jean calming down on her own is a lot healthier of a storyline and a process of healing than Xavier actively reprogramming her brain, which is what happened in the first couple of X-Men films, where Patrick Stewart's Xavier sees this darkness in Jean and psychically lobotomizes her to suppress it. Peter, by contrast, just talks to Jean and talks her down. Now, some would also argue that the bad things Jean Grey does in the comics and films, that's not Jean, that's the Dark Phoenix.
I don't see that as Jean Grey. Like, it's so not the original character, whether it be like what I've read from the comics, when I've read the comics, or X-Men Evolution, or the 90s show. It's like, we're not even close with how, I mean, the attitudes are off, but like the she's not the Phoenix in this movie, but she acts like Dark Phoenix. Like, there's kind of no excuse here.
But yeah, why do you say that like Jean, the Phoenix, and Dark Phoenix are separate entities? Because they're not. The Phoenix and Jean and Dark Phoenix are all the same person. It's not like with Venom, where Eddie Brock and the symbiote come together to make Venom, that they're two separate entities that when unified are Venom. No, Jean is the Phoenix, and the Phoenix is Jean. And they have always been one entity, even if neither of them realized it at the time. Jean created the Phoenix in the white-hot room that exists beyond space and time. And the Phoenix created Jean. They're not two people, but rather one entity that paradoxically, across reality, made itself from itself. It's like how Barry Allen made the Speed Force, and the Speed Force gave Barry Allen the power to create the Speed Force. It's kind of like a paradox that loops upon itself. It permeates throughout time and thus is not confined to the limitations of time. The Phoenix Force is this cosmic force of death and rebirth that permeates throughout reality, but Jean made it, and Jean is obviously not eternal, but the Phoenix Force is, meaning they're both eternal. They're both the same entity, a manifestation of the Force, but the Force is a manifestation of her. However, this is a more recent retcon thanks to the Krakoa era that tied Jean to the Phoenix Force all the more. There are multiple hosts of the Phoenix Force: Cyclops, Hope Summers, Rachel Summers, hell, Spider-Man even has it really briefly for a while. But Jean was always distinct because the Phoenix Force and Jean always bonded the most. Aside from Hope Summers, Jean was the first to become the White Phoenix, a unified version of the Phoenix so perfectly aligned with the Phoenix Force that they blended into one entity. And even before that, at the earliest moments of the Phoenix storyline, the Phoenix Force completely embodied Jean's entire persona, blending almost perfectly with her. Regardless of what stage of the story you're in, the Phoenix Force was always one with Jean Grey in one form or another. The most recent retcons just made that more obvious. Does that make sense? It's a little confusing, I know. Dark Phoenix is just another facet of Jean brought up by the Hellfire Club, screwing around in Jean's brain. Kind of like how when Jean screwed around in the Hulk's brain, it brought out the Savage Hulk. Savage Hulk is a facet of the Hulk and of Bruce. They're separate aspects of the same core person, on some level, with some shenanigans from hell mixed in too, and the one below all. So when Dark Phoenix kills 5 billion people in the comics, Jean did that. That's still Jean. It's not the Jean we know, but it's still Jean. All of that is her, and thus she is capable of villainy in the comics. So it makes sense she's capable of villainy in the films. Except, not really. Because she's not really a villain in the films, is she? She's just a terrorist, which is not the same thing as someone who destroys an entire planet. A lot of people are stunned that their first main intro to the X-Men, outside of Ms. Marvel and Wonder Man, are them as terrorists. But you forget, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And the X-Men right here represent that ambiguity. Most people criticizing Jean ignore that she's focused on attacking damage control. All other damage she does is incidental, it's collateral, but she's focused on an organization rounding up mutants and taking them off the streets. Now I watched videos from Jester Bell, Real Life Fake Wizard, and Mauler, and all of them neglect to mention that mutants for the last several years in the MCU, across multiple stories, Ms. Marvel, Wonder Man, are being systemically hunted down. And they ignore how other heroes, like Spider-Man, are actually helping the organizations that hunt them down out. Characters like Sam Wilson stand for the institutions of America, even when those people hurt others. This system of oppression is designed to attack specific people, and as we see in Wonder Man, even if they don't become superheroes, just want to work a job as an actor, superpowered people can still lose out on job opportunities because the insurance rates are too high to manage and account for all the damages and risks they present. If you're born with powers like a mutant, you're given fewer rights at birth than your non-powered peers. You can't get employment. And if you're a teenager, you're a walking hydrogen bomb potentially. So yeah, you're stripped of powers and the government wants to keep you from attacking anyone or hurting anyone. And that pressure can make a terrorist, as you see with Jean. Some might think the X-Men are just another superhero team, but they're not. If you ignore several key stories and events, sure, maybe they're no different than the Avengers, and it's a melodrama with romance and love and heartbreak and all that. They fought supervillains and went into space. They fought Mojo. There's nothing deep and political about Mojo, right? A capitalist ghoul who kidnaps people off of the streets in other worlds and forces them to play in a TV show forever. But in the last 25 years or so of X-Men stories, which a lot of people neglect because they've focused on the 90s, I guess, X-Men stories have tried to present the mutants as more ostracized from their fellow superheroes than ever before.
The MCU doesn't understand what moral ambiguity is. That's just how they try to justify evil characters doing evil things, because they're like, well, this character has trauma. That's unfortunately, and like X-Men fans will point this out, that's unfortunately what started to creep up in the 2010s and the 2020s with the X-Men. There's kind of no way to separate it from like modern day mindsets and politics, and the X-Men like has had politics associated with them and, political storylines, that the perception of them started to become like the X-Men are hated and feared first, and that therefore justifies all that they do, something like that.
Right.
That's at least what's happened in the comics. And that's how we keep getting these stories where the X-Men are just like becoming more and more cruel.
Jester Bell here is referring to a comic called Schism, where Wolverine and Cyclops fought over the direction of mutant kind following the events of M-Day that reduced the mutant population to under 300 mutants. This ultimately leads to Cyclops forming his own faction of the X-Men, ultimately taking the Phoenix Force for himself, killing Professor X, and becoming a radical who believed his actions protected mutant kind from oppression. Magneto is his anchor in this storyline. But what's odd is that during the 2010s, we also saw Krakoa, where mutant kind created their own utopian society. Krakoa is its own Byzantine saga of intrigue, sure, but the ultimate message is that if you can't fit in with society, you can make your own utopia, independent of that, and that society will still feel threatened by those finding success on their own terms. Again, very similar to what happened in real life. A disturbing parallel can be drawn between Krakoa and Black Wall Street. Founded in 1906, Black Wall Street was a district in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where 100 black-owned businesses were founded and thrived. However, in 1921, from May 31st to June 1st, a massive mob of white people, many of whom were actually deputies of the US government, and some were aided by police officers, laid siege to Black Wall Street. The entirety was burned and destroyed, and dozens of people were killed. Hundreds, if not thousands, of black people were injured, some severely, by the attack. Businesses destroyed, lives ruined. To date, it's one of the worst hate crimes in American history, and for many years, it wasn't even taught about in schools. It might be in poor taste to compare real-life horror to a fictional massacre of Krakoa, but then again, the X-Men have often drawn parallels to real-life violence in the pages of their story. Fiction is a great way to recontextualize real horror because it allows the magnitude of said horror to hit harder. Fiction is often more real than reality. But this refusal to engage with the greater ideas of X-Men is the ultimate defense for these storylines. People do not want to engage with the ideas of X-Men, but act like experts on them. They're not freedom fighters fighting for mutant rights, they're just superheroes.
After all of these years of being like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine, like, oh, it would be so cool to have, like, the X-Men cross over with the Avengers. Like, what if everything was in the same canon? Well, we're finding out now what that's going to look like, and it is, well, terrorism. It seems like the Sentinels have a point. Henry Gyrick might have a point, because, oh my gosh, our introduction to Jean Grey.
And in the process, these people side with the humans in each of these stories that built the Sentinels. These machines designed to oppress mutants because they feared what they can do. Because some mutants are terrorists, but they're also revolutionary figures. It's a common myth that the X-Men were designed to replicate the civil rights movement, with many erroneously comparing and claiming that Professor Xavier and Magneto are analogs for both Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. But this is built on the false belief that Martin Luther King Jr. did revolution the right way, while Malcolm X was some violent radical, a belief maintained by mainstream society to hide the fact that the CIA and FBI, at the time of both of them being alive, saw them both as two of the most dangerous people in America.
We are oppressed. We are exploited. We are downtrodden. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights. So the only way we're going to get some of this oppression and exploitation away from us or aside from us is come together against the common enemy.
And I contend that the cry of black power is at bottom a reaction to the reluctance of white power to make the kind of changes necessary to make justice a reality for the Negro. I think we've got to see that a riot is the language of the unheard.
They were both threats that undermined the white status quo, and at the time in their lives, they were both threatened. repeatedly, arrested repeatedly, and made to look illegitimate by mainstream society, even as their movements built momentum.
Know what I hate about your kind? You act like you got it so bad! Normal people have it hard too! Harder!
It's irrelevant if a protest is violent or peaceful, because those in power feel threatened by both.
And I, for one, as a Muslim, believe that the white man is intelligent enough. If he were made to realize how black people really feel and how fed up we are without that old compromise and sweet talk. Stop sweet talking him. Tell him how you feel. Tell him what kind of hell you've been catching, and let him know that if he's not ready to clean his house up, if he's not ready to clean his house up, he shouldn't have a house. It should catch on fire and burn down.
The idea of revolution done the right way is a myth that society made for itself to pretend that what they're protesting isn't right, but they still believe in change. It's a lie to tell yourself that you're actually not as terrible of a person as you think you are. And ultimately also, if you consider Professor X as the good revolutionary, Magneto as the evil one, well, read the comics, that falls apart a lot. Because I think Charles has done way shadier shit than what Magneto has. At least Magneto doesn't hide when he does something intense. And of course, some retcons have relieved Magneto of some of the more terrible things that have happened in his name, like the whole stuff with Zorn during the Grant Morrison run of X-Men. The X-Men have always been a story about oppressed minorities fighting for and fighting against a society that hates and fears them. Yes, even back during the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby years, there were elements of revolution in that, dealing with oppression. The Sentinels appeared 14 issues into the Jack Kirby Stan Lee run, after all. It's a delusion that Chris Claremont brought in these themes into the works. The balance between peaceful coexistence and mutant supremacy is a core concept of the book, and the individual members have been complicated. Storm was a thief, Wolverine was a murderer, Rogue was an outright villain, so was Emma Frost, Gambit partook in the genocide of the Morlocks in the Mutant Massacre storyline, and Jean Grey killed 5 billion people by devouring a star and causing an intergalactic trial to be held about her. These characters have always been terrorists, but they've always been freedom fighters. This is just the Gen Z version of that character, a radical who, due to her emotional distance to others, is detached, and thus sees the world as a world of NPCs getting in the way of her true happiness. It's an aggressive character who is honestly positioned to be a great central piece of a story moving forward. How does one do revolution when wanting to maintain something from society, but also learning the consequences of their actions have unintended destructive side effects to those who are vulnerable? Odd how these reactionaries are only mad at the woman doing revolution, not the Punisher, or Sentry, or Killmonger, or Loki. It's just when Jean does it, even though Jean's actions are far, far lesser. I mean, after all, Jean Grey destroyed an empty building, and Loki tried to blow up an entire planet full of people. Totally the same, right? The same thing happened with Wanda previously, though that again, at least Wanda, was more overtly destructive and more violent. Jean Grey does collateral damage. But looking at the full roster of X-Men, a major picture is painted for the direction that we're going in. While a lot of people want to talk about Indy Neveready, I think the one particular casting choice that tells me the most about what Jean's arc will be is not incidental, and will indeed reflect on the direction her character takes moving forward. And that, of course, is Adam Driver as Nathaniel Milbury, who we all know is Mr. Sinister. Nathaniel Milbury is the alias Nathaniel Essex takes when he goes to America, opening up a clinic in New York City back in the late 1800s. He essentially experiments on several mutants during this time and does some heinous stuff. Among the mutants he experiments on is Daniel Summers, an ancestor of Scott Summers. Now, much later, there was an event called Project Black Womb, which involved even Irene Adler, Mystique's lover, Destiny, as well as Brian Xavier and Kurt Marco, the fathers of Charles Xavier and Kane Marco. Kane Marco is, of course, the Juggernaut. Both children were harvested for genetic samples by Sinister directly, the study. Nathaniel Essex would later also get a hold of Scott and Alex Summers after they were seemingly orphaned. If this backstory carries through with Scott and Charles Xavier, that means that Professor X, Cyclops, and Jean Grey all have a common history with experimentation on mutants by the government. It wouldn't surprise me if all of this is the tie that leads the X-Men to doubt the government, to not trust those in power. And this even ties in with Rogue to an extent, considering her adoptive parents, Mystique and Irene Adler, again, that comes up again, also have ties to government plots, as well as Nathaniel Essex specifically. In fact, Mystique as Sherlock Holmes, yes, Mystique was Sherlock Holmes, initially brought Nathaniel Milbury to justice back in the late 1800s, all the while Irene Adler, ironically, would first capture Nathaniel, then work with Nathaniel. X-Men comics are a soap opera, everyone ties into something somewhere. And of course with Rogue, there's the added element that mutants can be dangerous, considering one of the most famous stories with Rogue is that she steals the powers of Captain Marvel. Should they do that, humanity, and indeed the Avengers themselves, would have reason not to trust the X-Men. The fact that Charles Xavier is so young, played by Christopher Abbott, who's a much younger actor than Patrick Stewart, the characters are the first class of X-Men. It is a young group emerging from the shadows, the beginning of a community. But of course, all of these plots aren't really new stories for the X-Men. The X-Men have always centered on rebelling against society. Government experimentation has been a key theme of X-Men films for some time. What we will see when the X-Men unify, of course, is a unified voice for mutant kind. So far, they're isolated, fragmented. A riot is the language of the unheard, and it makes sense that Jean Grey, being the most unheard character so far in the MCU, would want to rip the world apart. But once she has a union of other mutants, once she has Charles Xavier to advocate for her, once she has fellow brethren to stand alongside, will she be as unheard, and will her tactics change? The events of Brand New Day will not meaningfully end mutant bigotry. The new Avengers and the CIA investigating damage control, it's not going to stop experimentation on mutants. So why would anyone defend damage control? Did Jean do ethically wrong things? Yeah, of course, many things. But why would they highlight attacking damage control at all for that if this institution kidnaps people off the street? And it doesn't help also that in the comics, the government doesn't just capture mutants and imprison them, they'll also use other mutants to kidnap people. Mystique's first team of mutants under the US government, Freedom Force, is sent to bring Magneto to get tried for his actions of terrorism against humanity. Damage Control uses Peter Parker, a mutate, to apprehend Jean Grey, a mutant. And Peter, in his own self-loathing, creates a chip that the government immediately uses to suppress the X gene and mutant abilities. Meaning, even if the government replaces Metzger, even if the government changes all that, the next guy can still build upon what Metzger did and genocide mutant kind. In fact, now, an ordinary human with the right chip can have an edge against someone like Jean, someone like Cyclops, against the whole world of mutants, or someone like Sinister can use it as a tool to experiment further, silencing the animals you round up so they can't speak up or fight back. But these online critics aren't defending this for the sake of defending the fictional government. It's to defend the real government, to defend the establishments that exist in parallel to this fictional world. The system can't change. If things change, it can't be messy, and you gotta be nice to those who aren't directly dragging you off the street, even if they're complicit with the systems of power that led to you being dragged off in the first place. You need to be more like MLK and not Malcolm X. You gotta embody the ideas of Dr. King, who said that he had a great dream and all that. Pay no attention to that letter he wrote in prison or anything like that. No. You need to reject the status quo in a way that doesn't personally make me uncomfortable. That's the only way to do revolution correctly. And if you're not one of the good ones, you may as well not even exist. You may as well have your voice silenced, be an animal in a cage without a voice. Whether they want to admit it or not, people are not comfortable with the idea that a person in society is completely abandoned, then beaten down after abandoning again and again, may not rebel politely. And it does not matter if they do. Every criticism I have seen of Jean tries to frame her as pure evil, the villain, someone who should be locked up for her actions, and they often cite blowing up buildings.
She will mind control civilians, forcing them to drive tanks into DODC correctional facilities, killing countless innocents. She will set off explosives within the tank to cause extreme damage to the building, killing countless more innocents and releasing criminals.
And indeed, I just mean demolition. In Brand New Day, the building that blows up has been evacuated safely before a bomb is even discovered. No one dies. While there are injuries, there are no confirmed deaths in this scene. The average Hulk attack does far more damage, yet none of these critics ever blame the Hulk the way they've blamed Jean Grey for a controlled demolition of a building owned by the organization that stole her sister from her. It's fine when the Hulk destroys a building because he's just really mad about it, but when Jean Grey does it, pure evil, a monster. Many of these critics sound threatened by what Jean represents, the end result of a life of being beaten down. Magneto has always represented the consequences of unlimited discrimination against a people, of genocide, of cruelty. That's what happens when someone says no more and responds violently. Jean Grey in Brand New Day represents a modernized example of that. We're so used to seeing Magneto escape from a concentration camp that we're not used to seeing the current day iteration of that.
The justification is meant to be her lack of trust in anyone after her sister is abducted by a group of people who are essentially and simply evil by notable contrast to most everyone else. As though we're supposed to believe this event temporarily took her out of character and put her on a path of a fucking serial killer, whereas you would think she would only target those at the higher end of the DODC while giving her unique insight on the kind of damage she is seen dealing to random innocent people. But no.
You know, it's funny, I never heard anyone say this when Magneto killed those Nazis in First Class with a knife. I guess that was different though because they're, Nazis. Even though, they occupied the same rank in an organization that still kidnapped people off the streets and put them in cages until they died. I can't see any parallels whatsoever between that and this, huh? If you're wondering why people online are so electrified by the topic of Jean Grey in Brand New Day, it's because people see what Jean did and have a knee-jerk reaction. To defend the status quo, to defend the empty buildings, they can say, oh, the government is bad, but still defend the government. The villain is bad because they threaten the status quo. Well, it looks like the new X-Men team will exist to challenge that status quo. We are talking about an organization that over the course of multiple shows has taken people hostage, threatened their livelihoods, invaded mosques, captured them off the streets, and tortured them to death. I think the mutants are a little justified in being slightly pissed off with the status quo of things in the MCU. And considering the Avengers are led by Sam Wilson, a guy who defends the status quo even in the face of institutional problems, maybe we need that. One big criticism of the Avengers so far is that the bad guys are always people who want to shake up the status quo in some way, and the Avengers are fighting them. Do I buy into that fully? Not really, I have criticism with that. But Sam Wilson definitely does defend that status quo. It's been no secret that Marvel is going to gear up to an Avengers vs. X-Men film at some point. The most clear-cut divide so far between these two teams is that status quo, and it changing. For a while, the Avengers are the status quo, but now in a world post-Secret Wars, status quo has to be rebuilt. Who is going to direct the change it takes? If we want to get the X-Men and the Avengers to fight, we need to get the other side of the argument here. Characters who continually push to bring about change. Maybe they are self-reflective, they see the damage of a potentially reckless way of doing that change, but they still want change. They want the world to be different. because ultimately speaking, the world is violent to them. I think it's time we have the challenging discussion of what revolution means in fiction, so that we, through the real lens of the fictional, can examine what it means to be revolutionary.
How many summers like this one do you imagine that we can expect?
Well, I would say this, we don't have long. The mood of the Negro community now is one of urgency, one of saying that we aren't going to wait, that we've got to have our freedom. We've waited too long. So that I would say that every summer we are going to have this kind of vigorous protest. My hope is that it will be nonviolent. I would hope that we can avoid riots, because riots are self-defeating and socially destructive. I would hope that we can avoid riots, but that we will be as militant and as determined next summer and through the winter as we have been this summer.